Parents need to always be available to their kids. You don't wait for the moment when they need you to be available. You're going to have a really hard time helping a kid process grief if you haven't been available to them to process joy.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So, Dr. Kathy, today the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Facing the Dark, it's a hard topic, but I want to look at grief. I think that there's a lot of kids in the world today that have grief. When I was growing up, I didn't really experience this a lot. I didn't have a grandparent who passed away when I was a kid. And I didn't really actually know a lot about what was going on in the world in the news. I was outside in the backyard climbing trees and breaking bones and doing those things. That's what I feel like my childhood was. But I've noticed today that there's a lot of things that do weigh heavily on kids. There's a rise in divorce, and there's a rise in the number of kids whose parents are getting divorced. There's different issues in the world that kids are expected to kind of know about on the playground and talk about, maybe even talk about inside of their classroom. And then there's just like the natural grief things that can happen where there's death in families. And I think it's led many of us to wonder how to process grief well with our kids and with the kids that we love and care for. There can be kind of an expectation with this sometimes, Dr. Kathy, that kids should really talk through their grief. And as we dive into this topic, I want to ask you, is it wise to try to get our kids to talk and tell us how they feel when they're going through something that's really hard?
Sometimes, it depends on the situation kind of answer that nobody likes. Depends on the age and the stage. Young children know, in fact, probably 5 and under, they don't understand death enough to talk about it. They don't know what's causing their feelings. Little kids don't have any understanding of death at all. It's not until you're about 6 years old that you understand the permanence of death. When they're younger, they'll miss the person, but they won't understand that they'll never, ever again this side of heaven see the person. And so we have expectations for conversations that probably can't take place. And then we get frustrated and then they get even more scared. So I think we let them be. Some people would say, let them regress, let them whine, let them cry, hold them, tussle their hair, continue as many routines as you can. Those are the things that I think would be most important. If you always play solitaire with them, double solitaire, play double solitaire with them. If you always go to the park, go to the park. And this is where we have to put our children first, even if we don't want to go to the park. So if they want to talk, listen. If they want to tell stories, let them tell stories. And I don't think we necessarily have to ask, how does that make you feel? In fact, we've spoken about it here and I've written about it in books and I speak about it out and about, that boys have less of an emotional vocabulary than girls do. So it's extremely challenging for boys to express with words how they're feeling. And so they might feel sad if they can't please their mom by talking about how much they miss grandpa. They might not be able to communicate that.
Dr. Kathy, that's really helpful. I almost wonder too then what that does to us as parents when we find out that our kids are struggling. I think that it's in our nature to be people that redeem the brokenness. And so when something bad happens that's really too big for us to handle, it can be really overwhelming. Like I just remember talking to my kids about this, that at some point they're going to get up and give a testimony of God in front of church or in front of their school or their classmates or something. And at some point, I'm not going to be enough for them. And that's a hard reality, I think, for many of us as parents, that sometimes big things happen and we really can't be the help that our kids maybe need in that.
Mm-hmm.
So when this kind of happens and grief happens and bad things happen and we come really to the end of our rope, it's natural for us as parents to worry then about our kids and to go really into a black hole. How would you encourage parents to really approach grief with their kids?
Yeah, very carefully, with great kindness and compassion. I mean, just listen to this list of emotions that kids may struggle with when they're trying to grieve: fear, sadness, insecurity, confusion, anger, irritability, agitated, worry, guilty, anxiety. I mean, there's so many. This is big. And this is why parents are concerned, right? Because you don't like it when your kids are anxious. You don't like it when they're irritated or irritable. You don't like it when, they have a fear of being abandoned. And so, we want to fix it, but you know what? We can't fix it all. So part of my ministry to the parents who are listening would be to, rely on God and to pray that he would calm your children, that he would make himself known in a really unique way. And you asked, how would I encourage parents to approach grief with their kids? Wayne, could I suggest that the parents processing the grief themselves might be the most important thing they do for their kids? For the parent to find what he or she needs. Do you need quiet? Do you need to go on a long drive? Do you need to look through a photo album when nobody else is there judging you? Do you need to, watch old movies or whatever? Like, can you make sure that you're taking care of yourself so that you are more fully available to your kids? I think that becomes really important. And, Wayne, another thing that we mentioned here, in fact, you and I were just on the road together at a really beautiful event for the American Association of Christian Counselors. So because of that, you and I had drive time and we were able to talk. And how often do you and I say parents need to always be available to their kids? You don't wait for the moment when they need you to be available. You're going to have a really hard time helping a kid process grief if you haven't been available to them to process joy and to just spend time with them and go on a bike ride and go shoot hoops and play catch in the backyard and, play checkers with your 7-year-old. So I just want to encourage people, it's never too late to back up and invest and spend time with kids so that when they need you, they know that you're available. And it's going to be easier for them to trust you with their heart if you've always been there for their heart.
Dr. Kathy, I think that's really important. And thanks for, sharing that. I think that there's another dynamic here that has helped me talk through different hard things with my kids and really to be present with my kids. You talk about that idea of like going and playing catch with them. There's some of my kids that really love that. There's other of my kids that if I did that with them, it would be like purgatory. They would hate playing catch in the backyard. Like this is my dad's idea of a good time, And so I've found your resource, the book 8 Great Smarts, to be really helpful here. Why do the 8 Smarts really guide us to have better relationship with our kids as they then look towards, processing joy or processing grief or processing all these different emotions? Why do the 8 Great Smarts help with that?
Yeah, I love that you asked about that. All of us are created by God with 8 different ways of thinking and processing ideas and responding to both thoughts and feelings. And if we can acknowledge how we process and how our kids process and move into that space, they're going to be more successful. It's not, again, about success. It's about them meeting a need. So as an example, if somebody is word smart, we're all 8. But if somebody is very word smart, that's a child who's going to need to talk and need to listen. And you might be really tired and your ears might be full of a lot of words from a lot of people today. But here comes your 9-year-old or here comes your 17-year-old. And this is a son or daughter who needs to talk and needs to be heard. And that's how they're going to process. Logic smart kids process through understanding. So they're going to ask questions, and well, why did grandpa die? Why did our doggy die? And, we don't know. And so these are hard questions because we don't like looking foolish, but you let them process with questions. You give them as much wisdom as you can. Maybe there are Bible verses. Maybe there are stories you can tell, or maybe you just say, I don't know either, darling. And it frustrates me too. And you say, God's on the throne. And again, if you're a believer, as often as possible, you remind them that God is the one who understands. And therefore, we can choose to trust him. Picture smart kids will like to draw and to color. And so you do. You let them draw their favorite memory of sitting at the lake with grandpa. You let them draw as many pictures as they want to of their dog and look at pictures of the dog. Let them look through your camera and let them, print out 17 pictures of the dog if they ask you to, if you can do that. Music smart kids, songs and melodies. Maybe there's a song that would remind them, or maybe you can talk about, maybe you can even find a poem that would be an example of the kind of emotions they're having. That would be an example of word and music coming together. Body smart kids think with movement and touch. They're going to want to hug and run and jump and, kick the ball. And maybe you let them kick the ball with as much anger as they can muster into their right leg so that they can get some of that anger out of them. Nature smart kids love being outside and they look for patterns and possibilities there. So, going outside, going for a walk, going for a hike, letting them climb a tree, which grandpa's the one who taught them how to do that, and let them experience with their whole body both the joy that they had and process the grief that they now have. And then smart people love to be with people. They're not going to do well isolated. So let them sit at the adult table at dinner and be available to them and touch and hug and listen and talk and sing and, skip down the road and just be with them and let them process with you. Word smart people think with words and they can do that alone. They can journal alone or they can actually talk to themselves in their bedroom and be satisfied. Those of us who are more people smart need an audience. We need to process with somebody. And again, you don't have to have all the answers, right, Wayne? When the kid comes to you, you don't have to panic and, oh, I don't know what I'm going to say. Just listen. And you can say things like, keep talking. Oh, I love the way you're thinking. I had the same thought you had. What else is in your brain? You don't have to have all the solutions. A lot of kids tell me they don't need you to solve their problem. They just want you to know that they have a problem. And through time and experience, the problem can be solved. And then one of the more challenging kids is the self-smart kid who processes ideas deeply inside of himself. And if he's always been quiet, he might now even be quieter. And he's going to need quiet, peace, privacy, and space, and might not want to sit at the adult table, and might only want to be at grandma's apartment for 10 minutes, but you're going to stay for 3 hours and visit with people. And you've got to give that kid a chance to take a break and find some peace in his alone time. Yeah, the 8 smarts can really be helpful.
You know, as Dr. Kathy and I were talking today, it reminded me of a passage that comes out of 2 Samuel chapter 18, and I'll begin reading at verse 33. The king was shaken, and he went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And he went and he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." You know, Absalom in this time in history really rebelled against David and attempted to seize the throne. And his death was really politically stabilizing, but it was personally devastating to King David. Kings were expected to maintain composure, especially when they were in different places in public leadership. Public leadership did really require strength, and David's visible grief could be seen as debilitating for the whole nation. But David doesn't suppress his grief for the sake of optics. He actually mourns honestly, even when the loss is really complicated. Grief is rarely clean. Kids might grieve different things: a parent who left, or a grandparent who suffered, or a friend who betrayed them, or maybe even a world that feels unsafe. And this complex grief really does require space, not some kind of quick spiritual slogan that we could give them. Yes, it's important to know your kid and how they're doing, but knowing does not always mean controlling. So when grief comes and it feels like a black hole, it's important for us as parents to really step back. As Dr. Kathy said, to process the grief ourselves. Grief isn't a problem to solve. It's really an experience to walk through. So having been through it ourselves, we can walk our kids through it as well. And then we can ask questions like, what has this been like for you? Or where do you feel this in your body? And then listen without correcting. We're not called to remove the grief, but we are called to walk beside our kid through it. And I think doing that can be a bright light when they do face dark times. I'm so thankful that you listened to the Celebrate Kids podcast today, especially this daily segment, Facing the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender. Glad you joined us, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.